Today we're tackling a sensitive and important issue, the Quran's position on child marriage. This is a critical examination of what the text says and does not say. And the question we're asking is this: does the Quran implicitly condone the marriage of prepubescent girls? Let's be clear. The Quran does not say that girls who have not reached puberty should not marry. Some scholars believe that certain texts suggest it is acceptable to do so. Let's start with the most cited evidence, chapter 65, verse 4. This text is about the time women have to wait before they can get a divorce. The verse says this: "And for those among your women who are past the age of menstruation, if you doubt, their period will be 3 months, along with those who do not yet menstruate. And for those who are with child, their period will be until they bring forth their burden. And whoever keeps his duty to Allah, He makes His course easy for him." And here is the Arabic text: وَاللَّائِي يَيْسْنَ مِنَ الْمَجِيضِ مِن نِسَائِكُمْ إِنِ ارْتَبْنُمْ فَعِدَّتُهُنَّ 3 أَشْهُرٍ وَاللَّائِي لَمْ يَحِضْنَ. Now, let's talk about how this verse has been interpreted in Islamic scholarship. Both Tafsir Ibn Kathir and Al-Jalalain agree that this verse is about divorce laws for women who have not yet menstruated or girls who are not yet teenagers. My emphasis is on along with those who do not yet menstruate. The waiting time for those who do not yet menstruate is based on the idea that believers will marry and divorce girls before they reach puberty. I want to be clear that this refers to girls who are under the age of 12 years. Ibn Kathir writes,
This verse refers to young girls who have not yet reached puberty, and their waiting period is 3 months.
Similarly, Tafsir al-Jalalain says,
Those who have not menstruated yet are young girls who have not reached puberty.
Obvious what this verse means. If divorce is legal for girls before puberty, then marriage is also legal for them. Now let's turn to chapter 4, verse 3. This verse discusses marriage in the context of justice and orphans. Here's the Arabic text: وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. And if you fear that you will not deal fairly by the orphans, marry the women who seem good to you, 2 or 3 or 4. And if you fear that you cannot do justice, then 1, or those that your right hands possess. In this way, it is more likely that you will not do injustice. This verse is about marriage. It talks about justice, but it doesn't say how old you have to be to get married. Some people think that child marriage is implied because of the reference to orphan girls in this case. Could it be? Who knows? However, what can we learn from Prophet Muhammad's own example? Let's look at the hadith text, specifically Sahih al-Bukhari, 5134. Narrated Aisha, that the Prophet married her when she was 6 years old, and he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old. And this isn't an isolated report. The same account appears in both Sahih al-Bukhari, 5133, and Sahih Muslim 1422b. These hadiths are considered an authentic narration, and they're often cited to argue that child marriage was practiced and approved by the Prophet Muhammad. So, if child marriage were forbidden, then the Prophet's own example would contradict that. Instead, what he did is often used as an example in Islamic law to allow and support child marriage. In conclusion, the Quran doesn't say that child marriage is illegal, but texts like chapter 65 verse 4 and chapter 4 verse 3 have been read by scholars to imply that it is okay. Hadith records that the Prophet himself married a child, which makes it clear that child marriage is a fundamental part of Islamic custom. This raises profound questions about how we interpret scripture, tradition, and morality in the modern world, and it's an issue that deserves serious examination and honest discussion. In order for an argument to be strong, the person proposing it must be able to effectively address the objections that the audience will have, and that's what I'm going to do in this section. Let's start with the first objection. The Quran doesn't explicitly mention child marriage. Okay, I'll give you that. That's true. The Quran doesn't explicitly mention it, but here's the thing. Chapter 65, verse 4, indirectly allows child marriage by talking about the waiting period for divorce for girls who have not yet menstruated. On average, girls who have not yet menstruated are 12 years old or younger. To have a divorce period, they must be married or allowed to marry, which is my point. And let's not forget the Prophet's own example. Muhammad's marriage to Aisha, as recorded in the Sahih Hadiths, sets a clear standard in this matter. Aisha was 6 years old, I repeat 6 years old, when Muhammad married her, and 9, I repeat 9, when the marriage was consummated. That's not my opinion. That is Sahih al-Bukhari's opinion, and he is the most trusted and authoritative Islamic commentator that ever existed. Second objection, it was cultural, times were different. I really can't believe this is used as an excuse. All right, let's unpack this. Yes, child marriage was culturally acceptable at the time, but here's the problem. The Quran presents itself as eternally valid, not just for one time or place. Chapter 6, verse 115 states, "The word from your Lord is perfected in truth and justice. There is no one who can change his words. He is the hearer, the knower." This means no one can change Allah's words. If child marriage was purely cultural, then why didn't Allah prohibit it when controlling and managing and establishing marriage, divorce, and women's rights in the Quran? The Quran goes into detail about these issues, but there's absolutely no prohibition of child marriage. I want you to let that sink in. Now, the third objection is, Aisha was mature for her age.
Or jokes aside, but was she really?
Let's look at the evidence. According to Sahih Bukhari 6130, it says this, narrated Aisha, "I used to play with the dolls in the presence of the Prophet, and my girlfriends also used to play with me. When Allah's messenger used to enter my dwelling place, they used to hide themselves, but the Prophet would call them to join and play with me. The playing with the dolls and similar images is forbidden, but it was allowed for Aisha at that time, as she was a little girl, not yet reached the age of puberty. Aisha was playing with dolls when she was married. This testimony clearly indicates that she was still a child, a little girl not yet reaching the age of puberty. Plus, there's no historical evidence to suggest she was physically or mentally mature at the time of her marriage. If you look closely, this reasoning doesn't hold up. And finally, objection 4. The Quran requires marriage only with consent. Now this might sound reasonable, but let's look closely. Chapter 4, verse 6, does warn against hastily marrying off orphans until they've reached maturity. But here's the contradiction. Chapter 65, verse 4, still lets girls before they hit puberty get married. So which one is it? Is it to wait until they are mature to marry them off, or to marry them off when they are still children who haven't reached puberty? So what does that mean? Well, it means that parental consent, not the child's consent, is deemed sufficient. Is it the girl's own voice that counts? Is she making her own decisions? No. Her voice is completely absent from the discussion. Looking at old religious texts, I located different sources that talk about parents, not Aisha, giving approval for marriage. In one source called Al-Tabari, which is quoted in Iqra, it mentions that parents encourage the start of married life. Other old writings say that her mother helped her daughter Aisha get ready for marriage. This is sickening, and I'm personally disappointed and disturbed by the parents for allowing such abusive activities to happen to their child. Such humans don't deserve to be parents. So, as we've seen, that these common objections don't really stand up to critical examination. The Quran does allow child marriage, directly and indirectly. The Prophet's own actions set a standard. What is the concept of consent? It's tied more to parental authority than the child's own will, meaning they have no say in it at all. This is a deeply complex issue, but it's one that must be addressed honestly and openly, because the implications are too important to ignore. Let's talk about the logical and ethical implications of what we've discussed so far. This is where the conversation gets deeply uncomfortable, but also deeply important. If the Quran is perfect and timeless, as Muslims believe, then why doesn't it explicitly forbid child marriage? Instead, it provides legal guidelines for divorcing young girls who haven't reached puberty, as we see in chapter 65, verse 4. Please take a moment to consider that. A practice that is widely condemned today is not only left unbanned in the Quran, but is actually endorsed. That's a big problem. And what about the example of the Prophet Muhammad? His marriage to Aisha, a child, is not condemned at all. It's in fact considered okay in Islam. In fact, Islamic texts celebrate it, considering it an authentic part of his life story. If marrying Aisha was wrong, wouldn't Allah have corrected the Prophet? After all, he corrected Muhammad in chapter 80, verses 10 through 11, when the Prophet neglected a blind man. So why didn't Allah step in here? It's not just the Quran and Hadith either. A lot of early classical scholars, like Ibn Qudama and Ibn Taymiyyah, supported child marriage. They did this by looking at these texts and the Prophet's behavior. So, if this practice is rooted in the Quran, the Hadith, and Islamic scholarship, how do we reconcile that with modern ethics? We don't. It's outright wrong, and it should be abolished. Here's the conclusion. The Quran does not say that children should not get married. In fact, chapter 65, verse 4, makes it clear that it is okay by saying that girls before puberty can get divorced. The fact that Muhammad married Aisha, which is mentioned in the Sahih Hadiths, makes this view even stronger. For Muslims who claim that Islam is progressive on women's rights, this poses a serious theological dilemma. If the Quran is perfect and timeless, why does it allow a practice that is so widely condemned in today's world? And finally, ask yourself this: would a just, all-knowing God permit such a practice or abolish it outright?